nurse called Mary Doggett, who'd been brought up in India. And I think I'm right in saying that she was actually there in 1911 at the Sydney Street siege when Peter the Painter held up the police and everything, and she couldn't get to work at her hospital because of this. I don't think she stood next to the Home Secretary, unfortunately. But she and her husband Douglas had a son, Peter, Molly's beloved older brother Peter, who was born in 1915, and then Molly, of course, in 1918. I think both children were born in Port Sunlight, just on the west bank of the Mersey in the Wirral sort of thing. I do know that Molly was a lifelong Liverpool Football Club supporter, and even in her 90s went up to some box and watched some match. The family definitely then moved from Liverpool down to Chiswick. I know this because Robert has told me this, but her brother Peter had a wonderful singing voice and was a chorister at Westminster Abbey, and the other Westminster choristers used to say, "Imlac, boot black, moved all the way from Chiswhack." So I think they definitely moved to Chiswick. The family then established an egg farm in Send. I think a benevolent and rather wealthy uncle produced the money for this. And then Molly won a scholarship to the high school at Guildford. Apparently, ladies and gentlemen, I can't swear to this, but apparently she was a bookies runner when she was at school, and she made pocket money. But frankly, having looked at some of the photographs of the staff of Guildford, the high school Guildford in 1927, they looked a pretty formidable lot, and I don't know how much they, if they really did back the horses or not, but she says she made a living at it. She was there for 10 years. In 1937, she went up to Anstey College of Physical Education, which is part of London University, and she became a teacher in 1940. She went to Halifax for 3 years, and then she came down to St Martin's, and one or two people very kindly have written or have emailed my brother or me, and this picture of her in a bottle green divided skirt with a French pleat, elegance personified, as she taught dance, gymnastics and games. So we were very proud of that picture of her teaching these young ladies how to dance and how to be gymnastic. She went away to the United States for 1 year, and I think that's where she found something that she thought was really fascinating. She did an exchange program in the States in 1949, and then she came back and carried on teaching. But then, in 1951, she decided to accept a job in Chicago, working for the British Consulate General there in the Central Office of Information, I think. And she spent, I think, 10 years there, really, never marrying. There was talk that she was very much in love with somebody who was the Bishop of Fulham, called Roddy, but I think he married somebody else, and so I think she decided. This may be why she went to Chicago. I'm sorry, I don't know. I leave suggestions behind. I can't imagine how she remained unmarried until the age of 44, but there we are. She then came back to England. Her mother was quite elderly by this time, so I suspect that may have been the motivation. Mrs. Im, as she was known in the family, was quite an elderly lady by then. And she started work in London, and she used to travel up on, I think, the 906 from Woking to Waterloo, on which our father, Arthur Ramage, as you've heard from Alistair, also travelled because he had permission to go to his office slightly late because our mother had died and he used to drop his children to school before going up to the office. And, of course, the 906 worked its magic. You know, this wonderful thing, travelling together at the same time of day and all that. And extraordinarily, Molly was, she lived in Chobham. She was a friend of the vicar of Chobham, who was the most delightful person, and she lived for a time in the curate's cottage, and then she moved into a flat. And my father, our father, proposed to her on a Saturday morning, and she said yes. And unbelievably, that very afternoon, the son of another gentleman who lived in this also proposed to her, and she was hanging out the washing. She was hanging out the washing there, and suddenly this chap, who's called Christopher, came up and proposed marriage, and she had to say, "Look, I'm terribly sorry. Just accept it, sorry." So there we were. We were very had this forthright energy, as I'm sure you remember, those of you who knew her in her older years, a limitless store of kindness, and she had an enormous circle of friends. I mean, I can't tell you, we lived in this quite small village, Chobham, in Surrey. Okay, it was a bit stockbrokery, and it was the beginnings of the sort of southeastern sort of hegemony and all that, but it was still a village, you know, and she brought all these extraordinary people to Chobham. I mean, one who particularly stood out was I must be very careful here, actually, I mustn't do the Cumberbatch problem. There was an Afro-American girl called Elena Cyrus, whose mother was slightly worried she was getting in with the Black Panthers, well, in 1963, 64, yeah. And so decided to send Elena to England for a year to cool off and get away from these people in berets and all that stuff. So Elena went behind to the middle of this, and she was a beautiful, coffee-coloured, lovely girl, and all the local boys sort of went, of course, they all tried in the pub to sort of chat her up and everything. I always remember her turning around to them and saying, "Do you want a medal, or do you want a chest to pin it on?" In their place, it was absolutely wonderful. And then there was a Chinese boy called Raymond, and Molly, he came to live with us as a member of the family in the holidays. He was at St. John's Leatherhead. And Molly had this cosmopolitan, incredible series of friends who would come. However, it never put her off steering us. And frankly, my father and I were the biggest adolescents. Andrew and Richard were proper adolescents. They were sort of, adolescent age. My father and I were rather too old to be adolescents, but she steered us through. And I can't tell you the kind of triumphant way that she sorted things out. My father once wrote, they were married in May, and on one of his wedding anniversaries, he wrote a poem to her, and then a very short extract. May is the season, May so green to see, May a memorial both to you and me. God did the choosing, all have been so blessed. Benedictus Deus, and thank you for the rest. Rosary, sister and Peter, brother, and family, and stay, the church, the neighbours, Commonwealth, the scholars, USA, Stet res Remagiana, et in aeternum pax, et vive la Châtelaine, amour suprême, on slacks. This is how my father was very good at this sort of thing, and it was on this triumphant tone, but Molly brought this out, actually. Mind you, I did when I was finding this poem, come across a note from some child, in quite a childish handwriting, which said, "Mr. Ramage, you're always chatting, but I suppose it's to a good purpose. Sincerely, Paula." I don't know who Paula was. Anyway, our father died very suddenly, not at a very advanced age, and Molly was extremely practical, but very gentle, arranged everything and put us all first, and was a pillar of the village and the church at the same time. She had actually met Xenia and Jacob Yanya Hornstein many years before in America, actually, because Xenia had become friendly with Rafe Vaughan Williams in 1940 about the refugee. They had a refugee sort of program together, which he helped and she helped. And I think, as far as I can understand, Ursula Vaughan Williams had suggested that Yanya and Janie went to see Molly when they were in Chicago. So they had met in, I think, 1960. And when Janie was ill in 1968, Molly used to go over and kind of visit her. They kept in touch through Christmas cards, I think. And then Janie finally died in 1970. And so Molly and Yanya still saw a bit of each other. She didn't really enjoy being on her own very much, quite honestly, and they had this great shared joy in music. And they kept, it grew really quite a lot, and very resolutely, I remember this actually. Molly went over to Craig Elliot, which is Ladygate Road, Dorking, and there was a housekeeper who looked after Yanya. Who was actually, I think, quite a formidable person, this housekeeper. She was not called Mrs. Danvers, I regret to say, I don't know her name, but she was pretty formidable. And Molly decided that it was going to be either her or the housekeeper, so she went on and she sorted her out, and well, there we are. Just to say that Molly and Yanya then married in Chobham in 1978 and got on very famously together. Yanya was actually the generation who never ate the same thing twice, 2 days running. Molly, of course, hated waste and liked to have all the food finished. So their marriage was quite interesting when it came to food. Sorry, Alistair, back to food again. But Yannick was going, Molly, more, Molly. And of course, she always seemed to win, and he seemed to eat up everything, and he wasn't allowed to have a different dish every day, which I thought, I'm sorry for her, actually, but she was very good. Mind you, Philip Rice got it right on the button. He called it Molly's wonderful mixture of organisation and arm twisting. She was very good at it in a very discreet and gentle way. She was not thuggish in any way whatsoever, but she knew how to get people to do what she thought they ought to do. She was very perspicacious because they moved in, she saw in 1987 that Yanni was getting a bit older and slowing down a bit, and so she bought off plan one of these houses in Sons Farm so that Yanni and she could move into it. And I must say I was very impressed that she saw way ahead the benefits of the shelter community. After his death, she focused her driving optimism on St Martin's here, and on choir and singing, and as many of you obviously know far more than I do. She loved the Leith Hill situation. I had coincidentally been at Oxford with Brian Kay and James Bowman, so she kind of got in touch with them again. I think Brian is still probably the director of the Leith Hill, I'm not sure, but I think he may be. And so she became very friendly with them. She had a great capacity for friendship. She loved young people. She was always resolute and knew how to stand her ground. But she wasn't in any way self-absorbed, and in this